On June 18, 2024, Nvidia briefly became the most valuable company on Earth. Bigger than Apple, bigger than Microsoft, bigger than every bank, oil company, and retailer on the planet. Wall Street celebrated. Investors rushed to buy shares. Jensen Huang became one of the most powerful people in technology. But hidden behind that historic moment was a question almost nobody was asking. If Nvidia became the biggest winner of the AI revolution, who was supposed to win instead? The answer wasn't Nvidia. It wasn't OpenAI. It wasn't AMD. It was Intel. 20 years earlier, betting against Intel would have sounded ridiculous. Intel dominated computing. Intel powered the internet. Intel generated billions in profits. Intel had the world's best engineers, some of the world's most advanced factories, and relationships with nearly every major technology company. If you wanted to predict the future of computing in 2005, Intel looked like the safest bet imaginable. Now imagine two companies standing at the starting line of a marathon. One company begins 10 miles ahead. It has more money, more resources, more customers, and more influence. The second company starts far behind and is fighting just to survive. 20 years later, the company that started behind is worth trillions, while the leader is struggling to catch up. That isn't fiction. That's exactly what happened. And here's the shocking part. Intel didn't lose because it lacked talent. It didn't lose because it ran out of money. It didn't lose because its engineers suddenly forgot how to build chips. Intel lost because it kept winning the wrong game. While Intel focused on protecting the empire it already owned, another company spent years preparing for a future most people thought was impossible. That company was Nvidia. Back then, Nvidia wasn't famous for artificial intelligence. Most people knew it for one thing: gaming graphics cards. If you walked into a technology conference in the early 2000s and asked which company would lead the next generation of computing, almost nobody would have picked Nvidia. The company was respected, but it wasn't feared. Intel was. Yet somewhere inside Nvidia's offices, Jensen Huang was making decisions that looked strange at the time. Decisions that generated little excitement on Wall Street. Decisions that often seemed expensive, risky, and unnecessary. Investors wanted faster profits. Huang kept investing anyway. For years, those investments looked like a waste of money. Then artificial intelligence arrived. The reason this story matters isn't because Nvidia became rich. Lots of companies become rich. This story matters because it reveals how giant companies lose their advantage. History is full of businesses that looked unstoppable until they weren't. Kodak dominated photography. Nokia dominated phones. Blockbuster dominated movie rentals. Then the world changed. The scary thing is that none of those companies were surprised by the future. Kodak saw digital cameras. Nokia saw smartphones. Blockbuster saw streaming. Intel saw artificial intelligence. The problem wasn't seeing change. The problem was acting on it before everyone else did. And Intel had another problem. While the company was focused on dominating personal computers, an entirely new computing revolution was quietly emerging. Smartphones, cloud computing, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Each wave seemed small at first. Each wave looked manageable. Together, they would completely reshape the industry. By the time most people realized what was happening, Nvidia had already spent years building the tools, software, and relationships needed to dominate the AI era. The company wasn't reacting to the future. It had been preparing for it. And preparation is invisible until the moment it suddenly looks like genius. Today, Nvidia's value has reached levels few people thought possible. Meanwhile, Intel has spent years restructuring, rebuilding factories, replacing leadership, and searching for a path back to the top. One company became the symbol of the AI revolution. The other became a warning about what happens when success makes you comfortable. But before Nvidia became the king of artificial intelligence, Intel was the king of everything. To understand how Intel lost the AI war, we first need to understand just how powerful Intel really was. Because when this story begins, Intel wasn't supposed to lose. In fact, it looked almost impossible for anyone to beat them. Long before artificial intelligence became the hottest topic on Earth, Intel was already living every technology company's dream. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Intel wasn't just successful, it was dominant. Its processors powered the majority of personal computers around the world. Every time someone opened a spreadsheet, sent an email, or browsed the internet, there was a good chance an Intel chip was working behind the scenes. Intel wasn't participating in the computer revolution. It was the computer revolution. Much of that success came from a leader named Andy Grove. Grove was a Hungarian immigrant who survived war, escaped communism, and eventually helped build build one of the most powerful companies in America. He believes something simple but powerful. Only the paranoid survive. Under Grove, Intel became obsessed with execution, competition, and long-term thinking. The company constantly prepared for threats before they arrived. Ironically, that mindset would later fade. Then Intel created one of the most successful marketing campaigns in business history, Intel Inside. Before that campaign, most consumers didn't care what processor was inside their computers. Intel changed that. Suddenly, people weren't buying just a Dell or HP computer. They were buying an Intel-powered computer. Intel transformed a hidden component into a global brand. Few technology companies have ever achieved something similar. The results were extraordinary. Revenue surged, profits exploded. Investors loved Intel. Businesses trusted Intel. Competitors feared Intel. By the early 2000s, Intel looked almost unbeatable. The company had billions of dollars in cash, world-class engineers, and manufacturing facilities that many competitors could only dream about. If there was a king of Silicon Valley, Intel was sitting on the throne. Meanwhile, a much smaller company was fighting for survival. Nvidia had been founded in 1993 by Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Preem. Unlike Intel, Nvidia didn't dominate anything. In fact, the company came dangerously close to failure during its early years. Jensen Huang later revealed that Nvidia nearly ran out of money. At one point, the company's future depended on a handful of successful products. Imagine the contrast. Intel was generating billions. Nvidia was trying to stay alive. Intel had global influence. Nvidia was still proving itself. If an investor had to choose between the two companies around 2000, the decision would have seemed obvious. One company looked like the future. The other looked like a niche player making graphics hardware for gamers. But Jensen Huang saw something others didn't. He believed computing was changing. Video games were becoming more advanced. Graphics were becoming more complex. Traditional processors weren't optimized for these workloads. Nvidia focused on solving problems that looked small compared to Intel's giant PC business. Most people ignored this shift because gaming seemed insignificant compared to enterprise computing. Then Nvidia introduced the GPU, the graphics processing unit. At first glance, it looked like a specialized product for gamers, but GPUs were fundamentally different from CPUs. CPUs excelled at handling a small number of complicated tasks. GPUs excelled at handling thousands of smaller tasks simultaneously. That difference would eventually change the technology industry forever. The funny thing is that nobody was talking about artificial intelligence back then. The AI revolution was still years away. Researchers were experimenting with machine learning, but few people believed AI would transform the global economy. Most investors viewed it as an interesting research field, not a trillion-dollar opportunity. That made Nvidia's next decision look even stranger. In 2006, Nvidia launched CUDA. To the average investor, CUDA sounded boring. It wasn't a flashy product. It wasn't a new gaming console. It wasn't something consumers could buy. It was a software platform that allowed developers to use Nvidia GPUs for tasks beyond graphics. Almost nobody on Wall Street celebrated the announcement. Yet this would become one of the most important strategic decisions in modern technology history. CUDA gave researchers, scientists, and engineers a new way to solve difficult problems. Suddenly, GPUs could be used for simulations, scientific research, machine learning, and data processing. Slowly, universities started adopting CUDA. Researchers started publishing papers using CUDA. Labs started buying Nvidia hardware. Year after year, Nvidia's ecosystem quietly grew stronger. And while Nvidia was building the future, Intel was enjoying the present. The company continued generating enormous profits from PCs and servers. There was no obvious reason to panic. Investors were happy. Revenue was strong. Market share remained high. From the outside, Intel looked perfectly healthy. But history has a habit of punishing companies that become too comfortable. Because while Intel was protecting its empire, another revolution was beginning. A revolution that would start inside research labs, spread into universities, explode across Silicon Valley, and eventually create trillions of dollars in value. The first major warning sign arrived in 2012, and almost nobody realized how important it would become. That warning sign was called AlexNet. It would shock the AI community, validate Nvidia's long-term bet, and mark the moment when artificial intelligence stopped being a niche research project and started becoming the future. More importantly, it would reveal that Nvidia wasn't just a gaming company anymore. It was quietly becoming the company that would power the next era of computing. In 2012, a team of researchers entered a competition called ImageNet. Their project was called AlexNet. Led by Alex Krzyzewski, Ilya Sutskever, and Jeffrey Hinton, the system wasn't expected to change history. But when the results arrived, the AI world was stunned. AlexNet crushed the competition. The improvement wasn't small. It was massive. Researchers suddenly realized deep learning could solve problems that many experts believed were still years away. The most important detail wasn't just that AlexNet won. It was how it won. The neural network was trained using Nvidia GPUs. Suddenly, Nvidia's hardware wasn't just helping gamers render better graphics. It was helping researchers build smarter machines. Years of investment in GPUs and CUDA were starting to pay off. The future Jensen Huang had been quietly preparing for was beginning to appear. For Nvidia, AlexNet was validation. For Intel, it was a warning. Not a flashing red alarm. Not an immediate crisis. Just a warning that computing was changing. The problem is that big companies often ignore warnings because their current business is still working. Intel's revenue remained strong. Its profits remained enormous. There was no obvious reason to panic. But AI wasn't the only warning Intel underestimated. Around the same time, another revolution was taking place: smartphones. As billions of people moved from PCs to mobile devices, a new battle began. And this battle would become one of Intel's most expensive missed opportunities. The smartphone market exploded after the launch of the iPhone in 2007 and the rise of Android. Suddenly, the future of computing wasn't sitting on a desk. It was sitting in people's pockets. This shift created enormous opportunities for chip makers. Qualcomm, ARM-based manufacturers, Apple, Samsung, and others rushed into the market. Intel should have been a dominant player. Instead, it struggled to gain traction. This was shocking because Intel had everything needed to succeed. It had engineering talent. It had money. It had manufacturing expertise. Yet, despite spending billions of dollars trying to enter mobile computing, Intel never became a major force in smartphones. While competitors expanded rapidly, Intel remained largely tied to PCs and servers. Looking back, the smartphone miss was more important than many people realized. It wasn't just about losing one market. It was about missing an entire shift in computing. Every year, consumers spent more time on phones and less time on traditional PCs. The center of technology was moving. Intel saw it happening. It simply failed to capture it. And then came another problem: manufacturing. For decades, Intel's ability to design and manufacture chips gave it a huge advantage. Many competitors depended on outside manufacturers. Intel built its own chips. That strategy helped make the company dominant. But dominance can become a burden when technology gets harder. As semiconductor manufacturing became more complex, Intel began experiencing delays. The company's transition to advanced manufacturing processes became increasingly difficult. Products slipped behind schedule. Roadmaps changed. Competitors started catching up. Investors grew nervous. The company that once led the industry was suddenly struggling to execute at the level people expected. Nothing symbolized this better than Intel's famous 10-nanometer delays. What should have been a technological leap turned into years of frustration. While Intel worked through manufacturing challenges, competitors continued moving forward. The gap wasn't created overnight. It widened slowly, quarter by quarter, year by year. At the same time, Nvidia kept doing something simple. It kept improving. New GPUs arrived. CUDA became stronger. More researchers adopted Nvidia tools. More startups built around Nvidia hardware. More universities taught students using Nvidia technology. Every new user made Nvidia's ecosystem harder to replace. This is where the story becomes dangerous for Intel. Success in technology isn't just about having the best product. It's about building a system that keeps attracting people. Nvidia wasn't merely selling chips anymore. It was building a network effect. Developers learned Nvidia. Companies hired people who knew Nvidia. Researchers published papers using Nvidia. The ecosystem was feeding itself. Imagine trying to replace the operating system used by millions of people. That's how difficult replacing Nvidia was becoming. Even if a competitor built similar hardware, developers still needed to rewrite code, retrain teams, and change workflows. Nvidia had created something every company dreams about: a moat that became stronger every year. And here's the painful part. Intel wasn't blind. The company invested in AI. It acquired AI companies. It launched AI initiatives. But by the late 2010s, Nvidia had already spent more than a decade building relationships with the people shaping the future. Intel was reacting. Nvidia was leading. Then, just as Nvidia's advantage was becoming significant, an event arrived that changed the technology industry forever. An event that would turn artificial intelligence into the biggest business opportunity of the century. An event that would send Nvidia's value into the trillions and force every major technology company to rethink its future. That event was called ChatGPT. And when it arrived, the race that Intel thought it still had time to win suddenly accelerated beyond anything anyone expected. When ChatGPT launched in November 2022, most people thought it was just another interesting tech product. Then something extraordinary happened. Within 5 days, it reached over 1 million users. Businesses started paying attention. Schools started paying attention. Governments started paying attention. For the first time, artificial intelligence wasn't a concept hidden inside research papers. It was sitting directly in front of ordinary people. Suddenly, every CEO wanted an AI strategy. Every startup wanted AI products. Every investor wanted exposure to AI. The entire technology industry entered a race. Companies weren't asking whether AI would matter anymore. They were asking how quickly they could adopt it. And behind almost every major AI system sat one critical piece of technology: Nvidia GPUs. This is where Nvidia's years of preparation became almost impossible to challenge. Training advanced AI models required enormous computing power, not hundreds of calculations, not millions, sometimes trillions of calculations. GPUs were perfectly designed for these workloads. And because Nvidia had spent years building CUDA and its software ecosystem, most AI developers were already using Nvidia hardware. Imagine preparing for a storm that nobody believes is coming. For years, people laugh at your preparations. Then the storm arrives, and suddenly you're the only person ready. That's what happened to Nvidia. The company spent over a decade building tools for a future that looked uncertain. When AI exploded, Nvidia wasn't scrambling to catch up. It was already waiting. Wall Street quickly realized what was happening. Nvidia wasn't simply selling chips. It was selling the infrastructure of the AI economy. Every startup building AI needed Nvidia. Every cloud provider expanding AI services needed Nvidia. Every research lab pushing AI forward needed Nvidia. Nvidia had become the company selling picks and shovels during a digital gold rush. The financial results were staggering. Revenue surged, profits surged. Demand became so intense that some customers faced long waiting periods for access to Nvidia hardware. Investors who once viewed Nvidia as a gaming company suddenly viewed it as one of the most important businesses on earth. The stock price climbed. The market value exploded. History was being made in real time. Meanwhile, Intel found itself in a difficult position. The company still mattered. It still powered huge portions of the world's computing infrastructure. It still employed thousands of brilliant engineers. But the market's attention had shifted. Investors no longer cared about who dominated yesterday's technology. They cared about who would dominate tomorrow's. To Intel's credit, the company understood the challenge. Pat Gelsinger returned to lead Intel and launched an ambitious turnaround effort. Intel invested heavily in manufacturing, new facilities, AI initiatives, and long-term competitiveness. The company wasn't surrendering. It was trying to rebuild its position before the gap became impossible to close. But rebuilding is always harder than leading. Nvidia wasn't standing still. Jensen Huang continued expanding into networking, AI infrastructure, software platforms, and even CPU development. The company that once depended on gaming revenue was now shaping the future of computing itself. Every year, Nvidia became more deeply embedded into the AI ecosystem. And this brings us to the most important lesson in the entire story. Intel didn't lose because it lacked resources. Intel had more resources than almost anyone. Intel lost because it spent too long optimizing for a world that was disappearing. Nvidia won because it spent years preparing for a world that hadn't arrived yet. Business history repeats this pattern again and again. Kodak invented one of the first digital cameras, but failed to dominate digital photography. Nokia saw smartphones before most people, but failed to lead the smartphone era. Blockbuster recognized streaming, but didn't embrace it fast enough. Seeing the future is valuable. Acting on it is what creates winners. What's fascinating is that Nvidia Nvidia's biggest advantage wasn't necessarily its chips. It was time. Every year spent building CUDA. Every year spent working with researchers. Every year spent improving GPUs. Every year spent strengthening relationships with developers. Those small decisions compounded for more than a decade. By the time AI exploded, Nvidia's lead was measured in years, not months. Today, Intel remains one of the most important semiconductor companies in the world. Its story isn't over. The company still has talented engineers, valuable technology, and enormous resources. It may still play a major role in the future of AI, but history will always remember one thing. When the AI revolution arrived, Nvidia was ready and Intel wasn't. And maybe that's why this story resonates far beyond technology, because it isn't really about chips. It's about human nature. It's about how success can create blind spots. It's about how comfortable victories can make people underestimate change. And it's about how the future often arrives disguised as something small and unimportant. In 2005, if you wanted to bet on the future of computing, Intel looked like the obvious choice. 20 years later, Nvidia became one of the most valuable companies in human history. So here's the question. If the next trillion-dollar opportunity appeared tomorrow, would you recognize it, or would you ignore it because it looked too small to matter?